Thanks everyone. Also, for my day job, I work for Acquia as the Technical Director for Business Development. We've got a growing team and looking forward to helping a lot of you use Drupal. But I wanted to take a few minutes today to talk a little bit about the Drupal Revolution and what different kinds of revolutions. This is one of the examples of the first Watt steam engine in Madrid. And it started off a technological revolution, much the way that we're seeing Drupal and publishing is today. We've also seen other kinds of revolutions, political revolutions in the past. This is the Bastille Day, the storming of the Bastille Day, or storming of Bastille, which is commemorated every year on Bastille Day. This is Eugene Delacroix's painting of Lady Liberty leading the people. And here, of course, something a little closer to home is a snapshot of the American Revolution, of Americans fighting for independence from the British. We've also seen other kinds of revolutions, the Bolshevik Revolution, a political revolution, and we continue to see some of those after effects today. And of course, the Berlin Wall, another kind of revolution, freeing us from or freeing at least the Germans and people in the Soviet Union to move towards democracy. But I want to talk a little bit about different kinds of revolutions that are going on within Drupal today. And so, first of all, I want to spend some time talking about the revolution leading up to Drupal. I want to talk a little bit about the revolutions that are going on from a technology standpoint and how Drupal's addressing them. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the revolution that's going on inside Drupal. And for those of you new to the community, you're going to see some stuff and hear some stuff on occasion, and you're going to want to have some context for it. And I hope this is helpful. And then the last is I want to talk a little bit about the revolution that Drupal is enabling across the world. So as we look past, in the last century or so, what we've seen is large organizations have gotten larger and more specialized and really efficient. And nothing captures that efficiency of an organization to be able to get something done better than the supply chain. And so this is a great example of one of these warehouses where you have these trucks, sourcing parts from all kinds of different organizations, very efficiently bringing them together just in time. And so, this is a classic example of, the application of power, electricity, mechanism, wiring, all these sorts of things to build products in a really efficient way. But in this century, just as we're at the dawn of it, we've really started to see a different kind of revolution start. And we started to see things like another kind of key component of how we manufacture things. Things like LinkedIn, for example, which many of us use for our professional social networking. That beginning of social networking has been really critical to how we approach business and how we get things done. LinkedIn, by the way, is a big Drupal user now, and also is Twitter. Twitter's brought us together in a way that we've not seen before, where we can do things and collaborate in ways in real time. And so these have really changed the way that we think that we're going to get work done over the next century. Here's a gentleman, Yochai Benkler, and he talks about this combination of transitioning from the previous world of manufacturing highly efficient hierarchical systems to a much more distributed model, or what he calls social production. And I think this is a really interesting thing that I think is really important for you to understand when you're working with Drupal. Drupal isn't just about hiring somebody in a contract to get work done or delivering a site. There is a whole social component that's really critical about how you get Drupal done, how you integrate, and how your projects will survive and thrive in the future. And so let me take a couple of minutes and just dive down in social production. We talked earlier about the application of technology, communications, electricity, manufacturing, and how that came together to build products. But in the Drupal world, or in this new emerging world, there's other components to social production: creativity, experience, and wisdom. And I think these are really important because many of you may have gone out and tried to hire somebody in a Drupal position recently and maybe found that to be difficult. And one of the challenges, and some of the things that we know here in Atlanta, is there really are a lot of Drupal developers out there, but a lot of them are hobbyists, right? They're basically excited by using Drupal, they're keen to use it, but they haven't quite found that creative job that they really want. And so they're motivated to work on Drupal, they're motivated to spend time on their weekends because they get to do creative things with Drupal. They get to learn from people that they have a lot of respect for, core developers, contributed module developers, some of the business leaders in the community. And they're looking for the wisdom, as a programmer, as a technical person, they're looking for the wisdom and insight of an entire community and being able to tap into that. And so that is a really critical component of how they create things. And so when we're trying to motivate those people, you can't just motivate them strictly with cash. They're also looking for interesting problems to work on. There's lots, for technical people in a hot market, there's lots of opportunities, but they want to work on the interesting problems. They want to be excited by the work they come to. And so that's what drives the talent. And so we have to think of things not just about contracts and how we get things, but also, are we presenting our customer, or are we presenting potentially our employees, the people working with us, interesting problems, and is that going to bring us the talent we need? And so, all of this together has brought a real incredible ecosystem, because we've been able to do that. We've been able to sort of self-select from the world all these people who are really interested in solving these problems. And so today, if you go to Drupal.org and you look there, what we see is we have about 12,200 modules. To provide you with some context, that number was sort of around 6,000 in December of 2010. So it's really accelerated, or it has doubled over the last 7 or 8 months. I guess we're now 9 months. And then the number of developers who are actively contributing and have accounts on Drupal.org is really growing. And there's so over 12,000 now, and we know thousands of people are running Drupal companies around the world, creating businesses. And some of the largest ones are now what we traditionally would have thought of as an end user, an end customer. We'll see organizations like Turner could have dozens, possibly over 100 people working on Drupal sites if you included everything. I know the New York Stock Exchange, for example, at some points it had over 110 people working full-time on Drupal, and we saw NBC Universal with over 130 people working full-time developing and delivering Drupal sites. So that interesting dynamic of a really healthy ecosystem is really important. And so we've seen a lot of diversity in that ecosystem too. We started to see Europe get really significant numbers of downloads, as well as India is starting to become, I think, either number 2 or number 3 country for downloads in the world. And so huge explosion. And we'll see Dries travel to India over the next few weeks and really help to bring the attention to that subcontinent and get things going. And so, that's really the revolution of communication and social collaboration that's really led to Drupal being possible. But I want to talk about a little bit about the future. And if you're in a position where you're thinking about using Drupal, or you're looking forward, there's a lot of things that are going on in the world today. And I want to just look at a couple of them to talk about how Drupal is addressing that revolution. And so the first and probably the most significant one that we're all seeing is our addiction to mobile phones, and how we are constantly looking down to our hands instead of talking to some people. And Ron's going to facilitate us making eye contact in a few minutes. But the explosion of mobile technology, iPads, iPhones, Android devices, all kinds of portable devices has been really important. And so in the Drupal community, we've made some tools available to facilitate mobile integration. So we're making available something called the services module, so that you can do web services calls between your Drupal site and your mobile device. We've also got some interesting things with Node.js integration going on to send content and have real-time interactivity on those mobile devices back to a Drupal database. And we're experimenting and putting out themes and designs, especially things called responsive design, where the themes change automatically to adapt to the device. And then, of course, one of the hottest trends that everybody's moving towards is HTML5. A new open standard. And Drupal's always been a big supporter of open standards to make designs and our content appear appropriately on different devices. The second revolution that we're really seeing is the social revolution, and it's the social media. Many different ways to interact. We've learned as humans that we didn't want to just adapt to the way that websites wanted us to interact with them, but that we wanted it to be social. We wanted to do microblogging. We wanted to have forums. We wanted to have social profiles. We wanted to comment. We wanted to participate in forums when appropriate. And so all these different kinds of social behaviors and social services we want to be able to integrate into our site. And so Drupal has many. A great example would be to look at the Facebook. I think there's something like upwards of 50 different Facebook integration modules on Drupal.org. So we're really investing heavily as a community and innovating about how do we integrate with all these social platforms to drive it. And then another one that's really important, and we're just at the beginning of this, but as we look out to the industry, what we're seeing is that Drupal has succeeded so well and has put so much pressure on the web content management industry that the proprietary vendors have had to pick a new direction where they go. They can't compete on the features of web content management anymore. So they've started to move towards personalization. And they're really looking at 3 different kinds of personalization. Explicit personalization, and so for example, on a Drupal site, you would have something like a user rule where a user could see specific kinds of content based on the role they have on the site. And we can design and lay out pages using components like views and panels to do that explicit personalization. We've also got content recommendations. So there's content recommendations on Drupal. We also use content recommendations, trying to deliver content that we think is appropriate for you using Apache Solr. And so there's some great work going on there. And then we also can use things like the context module to deliver content to you based on your location. We know that you're in Atlanta, Georgia. We know that you might be in Croatia, and so we'll deliver and personalize to your local native language. And then the last thing that we're doing on personalization is we're doing a lot more work with A/B testing, and so being able to test and see what's most appropriate and what's most responsive. And so personalization is going to be a huge initiative. That's where the industry is leading, or the proprietary vendors are going, and Drupal will follow and pass them shortly. So pay attention to personalization. The next revolution I want to talk a little bit is the revolution within Drupal. And I'm going to provide a little bit of context because for some of you this might be a little bit surprising. There's a guy I look up to, a great guy named Ralph Koster. He's from San Diego, and he's a game designer, and he's built some of the most innovative work in mobile online games out there, particularly Star Wars Online. And Ralph did a lot of work on social and anthropological research, to study how do online communities work, what makes them really tick. And so here's a quote from an interview where he's being interviewed. He says, "What are the main barriers to community?" And he says, "One of the biggest hurdles is size. Communities tend to get fragmented when they get too big because it's hard to have shared interests that precisely and hard to communicate well with a large group of people. Reading sociology and anthropology stuff is really useful here. You learn that there are really specific reasons why people work together for goals and really specific group sizes at which communications tend to break down and people need more hierarchy. There are also some nasty typical stages in evolution that communities go through that aren't that appealing." And so as we know from our own experience, revolutions are not always peaceful. We want them to be peaceful, but they can be very disruptive, right? They can even get to the point where they're violent. And so sometimes when people go and they see what's going on in the community, they see that sense of emergence, they see that sense of growing, and they see conflict. It can be very disturbing to see some of the comments that are posted on IRC or a comment on Twitter and not have any context for it. But I think if you look at it in the context of a greater revolution, what you'll start to see is there's a lot of great change. And so I want to give you a couple of examples about the governance model that's evolving within the Drupal project to deal with some of this revolution. And so first and foremost is the Drupal core developers, right, who write the engine of Drupal itself. And so this is a file that's shipped with every copy of Drupal called maintainers.txt. You've all got it on if you've downloaded Drupal. And we go through the system, and what Dries has started to work on and has been working on for years is to make more of these systems available for leaders to take over, right? So we have a little more hierarchy, a little more structure, which can be a good thing. And so people are starting to take over and stand up and stand behind systems. And so now we've got dozens of people who are owning pieces of core or responsible for it. And so that's giving us a lot of structure and a lot of maturity. And he started promoting different maintainers, many different subsystem maintainers for Drupal 8 so that they have more autonomy and they've got more ability to get things done. And then, of course, just a couple of days ago, the Drupal 8 co-maintainer was announced. Ketch, I'll call him Ketch, but Nathaniel Ketchpool lives in Japan, works for my friends over at Tag One Consulting, and he's just been a real leader, one of those guys who's really principled, knows how to really make beautiful code, make it really elegant, make it performant, and try to keep things simple as possible. And with the explosion of features and functionality in Drupal 7, it's a great direction for us to be taking now, and it's also going to help us make Drupal more maintainable. So we're starting to see great structure around the core developers in terms of the governance model and maturity there. Also want to talk a little bit about the Drupal Association. So the Drupal Association is a nonprofit arm of the Drupal project, and it's really responsible for a couple of things: running its biggest marketing events, DrupalCon, doing some marketing, as well as raising money for core infrastructure, things like servers and legal bills and things like that. And so I was one of the founding members of the Drupal Association, and we've been going, and I've been elected 5 times now actually, and but we're going through some transitions, and so we're putting in a larger governance model. We're moving away from a group that can only self-elect to a group that is appointed based on skills, and to make a collaborative board that really has the skills. And so we'll see that board probably grow from its current 9 members to 13. And one of the criteria that they'll be looking for is a lot of diversity in skills, like getting things like professional accountants on the board, getting people like professional lawyers on the board, making sure that we're getting more representation from Europe because the US economy in Drupal is so strong, getting people from Asia. And so this is a really good thing that we're going. And so some of us will step down and to make room for that, but the Drupal Association's growing. It's really healthy. We've got almost 10 employees working full-time in DrupalCons right now, and so that business structure is coming together. And so you'll see things where people will say, hey, it's not moving in the direction I want to move it to move in. It's not serving my needs fast enough, but it is evolving, and it's evolving great. And I think if you take it and you compare the transparency of the Drupal Association to its comparable peers like the WordPress Foundation or Open Source Matters and Joomla, I think you'll see it's a really strong organization that's growing and meeting the revolution. And then the last thing that I want to talk a little bit about in the governance model is the Drupal trademark. How many people here have ever heard of Gary Hipsher? Okay. How am I doing for time? About 5 minutes? Okay, I'll try to get through this pretty quick. So Gary Hipsher is a really interesting gentleman. He came to a conference in the Drupal project called Open Source CMS in Sunnyvale in 2006. And Gary showed up, and he ran a small technology company out of Southern California. And he showed up and he looked across and he saw about 12 different open source content management systems being presented. And he looked around and he said, this is very interesting. And he went home and he filed for the patent and the trademark for Drupal. Basically, he was like, those guys seem to dominate the conference. They were about 85% of the attendees were Drupalers. I'm gonna get the trademark for that, and I'm gonna charge everybody who wants to use the name Drupal money for it, right? And so, sure enough, 6 years into the Drupal project, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office awarded him the trademark for Drupal, right? And so all of a sudden, the community was without a trademark. So Dries stepped up, the founder of the Drupal project stepped up and said, wait a second, here's my credit card, here's a lawyer, we deserve the trademark. And so we contested it, or Dries contested it. And so still today, Dries is the person who the community trusts, or has trusted so far, to maintain the Drupal trademark. And so he's also made it, and what I think is one of the most important policy statements, is to make Drupal a trademark available for anybody to use it in the community, as long as it's used in a fair way that's not competitive to their peers. So for example, you couldn't start a Drupal shop called Drupal Atlanta, right, and call yourself Drupal Atlanta Consulting, because there's more than one consulting company. Or you couldn't call yourself Drupal Georgia Consulting, because that would be unfair. But if you wanted to call yourself Dave Terry's Drupal shop, then that would be fine, because nobody would have any confusion about it. It wouldn't offer anybody an unfair advantage in using the Drupal trademark. And so this has been really important. And so today, the costs for the Drupal trademark are north of $50,000 a year to maintain that, and that's being borne by one individual. Okay. Now we hope, and we're working with the association to get that, but we haven't been able to solve every problem in our revolution. We can solve several problems, and we try to do them in parallel, but this is one that I hope to see us resolve over the next few years. And so this is the policy that Dries started back in 2008 and spent about 24 months trying to get that policy so that people could be heard and people could fairly use the Drupal trademark. And then here's Drupal.com, which is where the trademark application process, if you'd like to do it, you can get a Drupal trademark today. And so this is a lot of interesting revolutions that we're seeing. And so the last one is just really the revolution that Drupal's enabling. And I want to just tell you a little bit of a story about what's going on here. So this is a website called Al Jazeera. You may be familiar. They've had a great presence in the media. They're funded out of Qatar. They're very independent, and so they have a lot of interesting voices, and they're well funded, and so they do a lot of great investigative journalism from the front lines around the world, particularly in the Middle East. And so they have some offices in Cairo. And so they source out of there, and they tell stories out of their Cairo office. And so when the revolution started in the Arab Spring a few months ago, basically what happened was the revolution started, and then people started focusing and coming into Tahrir Square. And so tens of thousands, and then soon hundreds of thousands of protesters started showing up there. And all the eyes were watching them, but there was an issue, right? The typical process for when protests arose in the Middle East was that the dictator in charge would simply just send in the troops and just start killing people till they went away, right? And a lot of times we would just turn a blind eye and say, we have strategic interests, we'll still sell our fighter jets, whatever. because we wanted to keep things as stable, and if that's what we had to put up with, that's what we had to put up with. But now there was a change. Something else was different here. The people in the square now could actually tell stories from the square, and they were using Drupal to do that. And so Al Jazeera uses Drupal for their English blogs. And so the people in the square were actually sitting there with their laptops and their internet connections and blogging live from the square. And so when the soldiers came in, or when the thugs came in to get them and to start shooting them, they could post, and they could get it up on Drupal. And then that prevented it. And so then, Hillary Clinton and others in the Secretary of State and others watching around the world were immediately aware of what was going on as these people were going, as long as they could post their stories, right? But then they started to run into trouble. Their servers started going down. They couldn't post fast enough. And so we were fortunate enough to my colleagues at Aqua, we were fortunate enough to get a call from them and be able to help them and get them moved over to a new platform and be able to scale. And at a critical time. And so they could keep posting, they could stay awake, and they could stay up all night and keep posting and keep the soldiers and the thugs at bay. And so they were able to hold back. And so I think this is a really important part of the Drupal project, is by making this really powerful technology available to people, they're able to have a revolution of their own and get their own freedom. And so those kind of fundamental components of revolution, those fundamental components of thought and sharing and collaboration, lead to something that's going to affect each of your businesses. That creativity and that freedom leads to innovation, because people are constantly experimenting. They're constantly trying out new things, and that's what leads us to have 13,000 modules, or on our way to 13,000 modules that you can enter into your own website and download from Drupal.org. And so when you're looking for a platform for innovation, know that folks like Al Jazeera and many other businesses that we'll talk about later today are all innovating on the same platform, and you're benefiting from that research and development dollars that are going into the platform that's going to allow your business to expand. And you'll be able to adapt, right? One of the biggest pressures on us right now is that we're all being pushed down and squeezed to save money, to be profitable, to hold that. You've got to be able to be responsive to your business. Your business units are basically putting demands on your organization to launch different kinds of websites very quickly, different kinds of blogs very quickly, different kinds of business applications. And so your ability to adapt, because by using Drupal to customize and to be flexible, is really critical. And so I want you to think about, for the rest of the day, how can Drupal adapt quickly to my business? What are my needs? What are my priorities? And is Drupal the right platform for me to adapt to do that? So thanks very much. I hope you enjoyed our talk about Revolution, and I'm looking forward to getting a chance to network with some of you. So Ron, if you want to come on up. And if you have any questions for me, I'll be here throughout the day, and if you want to contact me or send me an email, I'm happy to follow up with you. Thanks very much.